The Dakota Territory of 1868 showed no mercy to anyone, especially not to Rebecca Collins. Abandoned by her militia escort during a violent territory skirmish, the young widow and schoolteacher had accepted that this might be her last day on Earth. Her water canteen had run dry, her horse had been shot from under her, and the distant sounds of battle drowned out her prayers. But then she heard it. The sound of hoofbeats approaching through the tall prairie grass. Through the golden haze of sunset, a figure emerged on horseback, like an answer to her desperate prayers. She didn't know it yet, but this day would change everything. What starts as a desperate fight for survival could lead to something neither of them expected to find again. Trust. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Earlier that morning, Rebecca Collins' fingers had trembled for entirely different reasons as she arranged the children's handmade maps on the schoolhouse walls. The carefully drawn territories formed a colorful patchwork across the rough-hewn logs, each one a treasure she'd collected during the previous week of lessons. Her silver cameo brooch clicked softly against the top button of her navy dress as she stretched to reach the highest spots, the familiar weight of William's portrait inside pressing against her heart. "Mrs. Collins," little Emma Blackwood's voice quivered from the doorway. "Do you really have to go to Fort Bridger with the soldiers today?" Rebecca turned to find all 8 of her students huddled in the entrance, their breath visible in the chilly morning air. She pressed her hands to her skirts, smoothing away the chalk dust and forcing a smile. "It's only for 3 days, dear ones. I must collect our new books and supplies before winter sets in. Mrs. Peterson will look after you until I return." But even as she spoke the words, something deep inside her chest tightened. 15 months a widow, and still every goodbye felt like echoes of that last morning with William. He'd kissed her cheek, promised to be careful on patrol with the cavalry, and never came home. "We made you something special," announced Thomas Haze, the oldest student at 12. He nudged his younger sister forward. Mary clutched a carefully wrapped package to her chest, her eyes bright with anticipation. Rebecca knelt to accept the gift, her throat tightening as she unwrapped a hand-bound journal. Inside, each student had written a message and drawn a picture. On the first page, in Mary's careful script, "To the bravest teacher in Dakota Territory, please come back to us." The morning passed in a blur of geography lessons and songs about the states, but Rebecca's attention kept drifting to the growing tension outside. The cavalry detachment sent to escort her had arrived earlier than expected, their faces grim, with news of increased Lakota movement in the territory between settlements. Lieutenant Parker, dropping off a map of their planned route, had mentioned seeing war parties that concerned him. "Tensions are higher than we expected," he'd warned, glancing toward the western horizon. "You're sure about making this journey now? Might be safer to wait until spring." But Rebecca had already arranged everything. The schoolhouse desperately needed the promised books and winter supplies. After losing William, teaching these frontier children had become her only purpose. This journey was necessary, not just for them, but for her own sense of duty. As she dismissed the children early, their worried faces tugged at her heart. They hugged her fiercely, one by one, until only Emma remained, clutching Rebecca's skirts. "Promise you'll come back," the child whispered. Rebecca touched her cameo brooch, thinking of all the promises life had already broken. But she forced brightness into her voice. "Of course I will. We still have to finish learning about all the territories, don't we?" After they left, Rebecca stood alone in the schoolhouse, listening to the distant sounds of soldiers preparing. Their horses. She packed her traveling bag with trembling hands, a change of clothes, William's letters, her small Bible, and the children's gift journal. The cavalry escort would depart soon, and she needed to be ready, Just before leaving, she paused at William's old desk in the corner. He'd built it himself when she'd first taken the teaching position, proudly carrying it to the schoolhouse on his broad shoulders. "Every proper teacher needs a proper desk," he declared, his eyes crinkling with love and pride. Rebecca ran her fingers along the smooth wood, remembering how the drawer still stuck slightly, just as it had the day he made it. Inside lay the compass he'd carried through 3 years of military service. She'd been so relieved when he'd been assigned to the peaceful Dakota Territory, believing the dangerous days were behind them. The territory disputes had changed everything. The first warning shots began to fall as she locked the schoolhouse door. Rebecca pulled her woolen shawl tighter and hurried toward the cavalry gathering point, trying to ignore the way tension hung in the air. The streets were nearly deserted now, most folks having heeded the militia's warnings and headed to the settlement's central meeting house. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Collins women are made of sterner stuff." He'd said it often during Rebecca's childhood in Pennsylvania, usually while teaching his daughters to face hardship with grace. Rebecca lifted her chin against the growing sounds of distant conflict. She was a Collins woman twice over now, by birth and by marriage, and she would not let fear deter her from her duty. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Still, as she waited for the escort by the gathering wagons, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to embark on a journey far different from the one she'd planned. The cavalry unit arrived in formation, their uniforms already dusty from morning patrol. Rebecca clutched her traveling bag closer as Lieutenant Parker secured her trunk alongside the supply wagon. "Change of plans, Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice low and concerned. "We've received reports of a band of Lakota warriors moving across our intended route. We'll need to take the northern passage instead." "Is that safe?" Rebecca asked, remembering the stories of ambushes along the less-traveled trails. "Safer than our original plan." Parker glanced toward the horizon, where a thin line of smoke was now visible. The settlement at Crawford Creek was raided at dawn. "We'll need to move quickly and quietly to avoid drawing attention." Rebecca's heart raced as she climbed into the supply wagon. The driver, a grizzled older soldier named Reynolds, barely acknowledged her presence as she settled onto the hard wooden seat. The fear in his eyes told her more than words could about the danger they faced. The small detachment moved out within minutes, a tense silence hanging over them as they left the relative safety of the settlement behind. Rebecca withdrew her leather-bound journal from her traveling bag, running her fingers over its worn cover. The children's gift seemed suddenly precious, a reminder of why this dangerous journey mattered. The wagon lurched forward, and Rebecca watched through dust-clouded air as her small town disappeared behind them. Lieutenant Parker led the column, while 4 soldiers rode alongside the wagon, and 2 brought up the rear. Too few, Rebecca thought, for the territory they needed to cross. "Shouldn't be more than 8 hours to the next outpost," Reynolds called over the creaking wheels, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet landscape. "Long as we don't run into trouble." But trouble seemed to be hunting them. Rebecca could feel it in the increasing tension of the soldiers, in the way their hands never strayed far from their rifles, in how their eyes constantly scanned the rolling hills and scattered copses of trees. The wind carried sounds that made the horses nervous, distant drumming perhaps, or just the thunder of her own heart. She wrote in her journal, "The land itself seems to hold its breath today. I cannot help but think of William's last patrol, how the morning had seemed perfectly ordinary." The escort changed course twice more as the day progressed, each deviation taking them further from the established trail. By mid-afternoon, even Rebecca could see the rising dust clouds that indicated movement across the vast prairie, whether friend or foe she couldn't tell. "We're being followed," Lieutenant Parker announced during a brief stop to water the horses. The men gathered around him, voices low. Rebecca couldn't hear their conversation, but their expressions told her everything she needed to know. When they resumed their journey, the pace quickened significantly. The wagon bounced violently over the uneven ground, and Rebecca clutched the seat to avoid being thrown. Her trunk had come loose and slid around in the wagon bed, threatening to topple out with each jarring bump. The first shots came just before sunset, distant cracks that echoed across the open plain. Lieutenant Parker raised his hand, halting the column as he scanned the horizon. "War party," he said, his voice strangely calm. "At least 20 warriors, moving fast." Rebecca's blood ran cold as she followed his gaze. Silhouetted against the setting sun, mounted figures moved across the ridgeline, their feathered lances visible even at this distance. "Reynolds," Parker called, "take Mrs. Collins and make for the river crossing. We'll hold them off." The driver nodded grimly, reaching for his rifle. "What about the supplies?" "Leave them. Travel light and fast." Rebecca barely had time to grab her traveling bag before Reynolds was pulling her from the wagon. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. The animal protested the double burden, but responded to his urgent commands. "Hold tight." "Ma'am," he said. And then they were galloping away from the column, away from her trunk with William's letters, away from the small measure of safety the group had provided. She looked back once to see the soldiers forming a defensive line, their rifles raised as the war party descended upon them. The distance between her and the fighting grew quickly as Reynolds pushed his horse to its limits, riding parallel to a line of trees that offered some concealment. For nearly an hour, they rode in desperate silence, the sounds of conflict fading behind them. Rebecca's entire body ached from the punishing pace, but fear kept her from complaining. The sun sank lower, painting the prairie in blood-red hues. That seemed terribly fitting. Then Reynolds suddenly stiffened against her back. "Riders," he hissed, "cutting across our path." Rebecca saw them immediately, 3 mounted warriors emerging from a draw ahead, directly in their path. Reynolds yanked the reins, changing direction toward a rocky outcropping to their right. "If we can reach those rocks," he said, breath labored, "we might stand a chance." His horse, already exhausted, stumbled on the uneven ground. The animal recovered, but the momentary falter cost them precious seconds. The warriors changed direction, moving to intercept them with deadly precision. "Mrs. Collins," Reynolds said, his voice suddenly different, "when I tell you slide off and run for the rocks. Don't look back. We should stay together," she protested. "They want the horse more than they want you. I'll lead them away." Before she could argue further, a shot rang out. Reynolds jerked violently, a spray of warm blood hitting Rebecca's shoulder. The horse reared in panic, throwing them both. Rebecca hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Dazed, she pushed herself up on shaking arms to see Reynolds lying motionless several feet away, a dark stain spreading across his uniform jacket. The horse was already gone, galloping wildly across the prairie. The approaching warriors had slowed, apparently assessing the situation. Rebecca grabbed her traveling bag, which had somehow stayed with her during the fall, and ran toward the rocks. Her skirts tangled around her legs, and her lungs burned with each desperate breath. She reached the first boulder just as another. Shots split the air. Stone fragments stung her cheek as the bullet struck inches from her head. Choking back a sob, she pressed herself against the rough surface, trying to become invisible in the lengthening shadows. From her precarious shelter, Rebecca could see Reynolds' body lying in the open. The warriors circled it carefully before one dismounted to examine the fallen soldier. She couldn't hear what they said, but their gestures made it clear they were searching for something or someone. One warrior pointed toward the rocks where she hid. The others nodded, and they began to spread out, moving toward her position with deliberate care. Rebecca retreated deeper into the rocky formation, seeking any crevice or shadow that might conceal her. The light was fading quickly now, the brief, vibrant sunset giving way to the deep blue of approaching night. Rebecca pressed herself into a narrow space between two boulders, her heart thundering in her chest. She could hear them moving among the rocks, their soft footfalls and occasional words in a language she didn't understand. A shadow fell across her hiding place. Rebecca looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, a rifle in his hands. She closed her eyes, waiting for the end. Instead, a shrill whistle cut through the air, followed by a response from somewhere beyond the rocks. The warrior near her called out something, then moved away quickly. Rebecca remained, frozen in place, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Minutes passed, then what felt like hours. The sounds of movement gradually faded, replaced by the natural chorus of evening insects and night birds. When she finally found the courage to peer out from her hiding place, the prairie lay empty under the rising moon. The warriors were gone, but so was Reynolds, and with him any hope of finding her way to Fort Bridger or back to the settlement. Reality began to set in. She couldn't stay here. The nights in Dakota Territory grew bitterly cold, and she had no food, no water. Her canteen had been in the saddlebag of Reynolds' horse. The nearest settlement might be a day's walk or more, and that was if she could even determine the right direction in this featureless landscape. Rebecca forced herself to stand, though her legs shook with exhaustion and fear. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of smoke from distant fires. She had no idea if they belonged to friendly settlements or Lakota camps. "Collins women are made of sterner stuff," she whispered her father's words through chattering teeth, but even Collins women couldn't survive long without water and shelter. Already the temperature was dropping dramatically, making her thin traveling. Dress and shawl seemed woefully inadequate. She thought of her students, of their tearful goodbyes that morning. Had it only been that morning? It felt like a lifetime ago. The children's gift journal was in her traveling bag, along with her Bible and a small daguerreotype of William on their wedding day. Soon they would be all that remained of Rebecca Collins, schoolteacher, buried in the prairie grass alongside her dreams and duties. Rebecca took one stumbling step, then another, though she had no idea if she was heading towards safety or deeper into peril. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the rolling landscape, and every rustling sound in the grass seemed like a threat. Her strength was failing rapidly. The fall from the horse had left her bruised and shaken, and fear had drained what little energy remained. Rebecca sank to her knees in the tall grass, too exhausted to continue. "William," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I tried to be strong." That's when she heard it. So faint at first she thought she might be dreaming, the sound of hoofbeats approaching through the darkness. At first Rebecca thought she was hallucinating. The hoofbeats seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing strangely in the vast open space. But then a dark shape emerged from the night, a horse and rider moving with silent purpose through the moonlit prairie. She tried to hide herself in the grass, but movement was beyond her now. The cold had settled deep in her bones, and even breathing had become difficult. The rider was going to pass her by, just yards away, never knowing she was there. With the last of her strength, Rebecca reached into her traveling bag and pulled out her white handkerchief. Her frozen fingers could barely grip the fabric, but she managed to wave it weakly above her head. The horse stopped. The rider turned his head, and for a moment Rebecca feared he too would abandon her to the night. Then the horse changed direction, picking its way carefully toward her. "Woman!" The voice was deep, resonant. A man's face appeared above her, features strong and proud beneath elaborate braids adorned with feathers and beads. "What are you doing here alone?" Rebecca tried to explain, but her words slurred together incoherently. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, and she got her first clear look at him. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face that spoke of authority and wisdom. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark and intense, taking in her condition with quiet assessment. "I am Maka," he said, already removing a buffalo hide from his horse, "chief of the White Hawk band." He wrapped the heavy hide around her, and Rebecca nearly wept at the immediate warmth. It smelled of smoke and horses and unfamiliar herbs, wild things, surviving things. He reached into a decorated pouch at his waist and pulled out a small water skin. "Drink," he explained, holding it to her lips. Slowly. The water revived her slightly, enough to feel embarrassed at her helplessness. "Rebecca Collins," she managed. "The cavalry, they left me." Something hardened in Maka's expression. "They left you to die." He glanced at the sky, gauging the darkness. "We cannot stay here. Others search these lands tonight, and they will not show mercy to a white woman." He gathered up her traveling bag, securing it to his saddle. Then he turned back to her, his manner direct but not unkind. "I will take you to my camp. It is the only safe place within a day's ride." Rebecca nodded, though a new fear replaced the old. She had heard stories of captives taken by the Lakota, some treated well, others not. But what choice did she have? Death awaited her on the prairie tonight. Maka lifted her onto his horse before mounting behind her. One arm wrapped securely around her waist, while the other held the reins. "My people are camped beyond the river bend," he said, his voice close to her ear. "It is protected by the spirits of the land. You will be safe there if you respect our ways." The horse moved forward, and Rebecca found herself cradled in unexpected security. Maka's body heat seeped through the buffalo hide, warming her back while his arm kept her steady. She tried to focus on the things he asked her to tell him, that she was a teacher heading to Fort Bridger for supplies, that she'd been widowed when her husband's patrol was ambushed 15 months ago. "Husband was soldier?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, William Collins, cavalry lieutenant. And now you teach the children of soldiers and settlers?" "Not just their children, any child who wishes to learn." She thought of her small schoolhouse with its maps and books. Knowledge belongs to everyone. Something in her words seemed to interest him. The tension in his posture eased slightly. "Among my people, we have storytellers who keep our knowledge. They teach through the winter moons when the land rests." Rebecca wanted to ask more about these storytellers, but exhaustion was overtaking her again. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her and the security of Maka's arm around her waist lulled her toward unconsciousness, despite her best efforts. "Rest," his voice rumbled against her back. "The ride is long, and you are safe now." As Rebecca drifted into darkness, her last conscious thought was that for the first time since William's death, those words, "You are safe now," actually felt true. Rebecca drifted back to consciousness gradually, aware first of warmth, then of unfamiliar scents, wood smoke, herbs, and tanned hides. She was lying on something soft, wrapped in fur blankets with a small fire burning nearby. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, that William would be sitting by the fire when she opened her eyes. But when she did open them, she found herself in a large tipi, the firelight casting dancing shadows on painted hide walls. Across the fire sat a woman grinding something in a wooden bowl, her long grey-streaked hair falling in 2 thick braids over her shoulders. Hearing Rebecca stir, she looked up with dark, appraising eyes. "You wake," she said in accented English. "Good. Maka worried the cold had taken your spirit." Rebecca pushed herself upright, conscious that she was now dressed in soft buckskin clothing rather than her own dress. The woman noted her confusion. "Your clothes were wet from the grass. They dry there." She nodded toward Rebecca's dress and petticoats hanging from a wooden frame near the fire. "I am Wichapi, mother of Maka. Thank you for your help." Rebecca said, her voice still rough from cold and fear. "I'm Rebecca Collins." Wichapi nodded, returning to her grinding. "Mahka told me, the teacher with no escort." From outside came the sounds of a village. Children's laughter, women's voices calling to one another, the distant pounding of a drum. Rebecca's mind raced with questions, but before she could voice any of them, the teepee flap opened. Mahka ducked inside, his imposing height requiring him to bend almost double to enter. In daylight, Rebecca could see him more clearly. The strong lines of his face, the intricate beadwork on his clothing, the single eagle feather rising from his braided hair. Power and authority radiated from him, yet there was also a thoughtfulness in his dark eyes that hadn't been visible in the night's fear and confusion. "You have recovered your strength," he said, settling cross-legged by the fire. It wasn't a question, but an observation. "Yes, thank you for saving my life." Rebecca clutched the fur blanket around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how out of place she must appear. Mahka accepted her thanks with a slight nod. "The council wishes to meet you. They have questions about why a white woman travels alone through our territory during times of war." "I wasn't alone," Rebecca clarified. "I had an escort of soldiers before we were attacked." "Soldiers who left you to die," Wichapi interjected, her hands never pausing in their work. "One tried to save me," Rebecca said, remembering Reynolds' sacrifice. "He was killed for his effort." Mahka exchanged a glance with his mother. "These are things the council should hear. When you are ready to stand, we will go to them." Rebecca hesitated, looking down at the unfamiliar buckskin dress. "My clothing is still damp," Wichapi finished for her. "The dress you wear now is more suitable for our camp anyway, unless you fear to look like one of us." There was a challenge in the older woman's tone that Rebecca didn't miss. "I fear only to seem ungrateful for your kindness," she replied carefully. "The dress is beautiful." Wichapi's expression softened slightly. She reached for a small carved box and withdrew something that gleamed in the firelight. "Your spirit token," she said, holding out Rebecca's cameo brooch. "Mahka said you clutched it even in your sleep." Rebecca accepted it gratefully, running, her fingers over William's profile preserved under glass. "It contains my husband's image. A way to keep his spirit close." Wichapi nodded in understanding. "Our ways are not so different." Rebecca pinned the brooch to her borrowed dress, its familiar weight against her heart providing comfort in these strange surroundings. She rose shakily to her feet, determined to face whatever counsel awaited her with the dignity her father had taught her. Mahka watched her with quiet assessment. "You have strength, teacher. You will need it among my people." Outside, the Lakota encampment sprawled before her, dozens of teepees arranged in a great circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, horses grazing in a nearby meadow. Children paused in their play to stare at her, women looked up from their work, and warriors stood straighter, hands moving instinctively to weapon belts. Rebecca felt the weight of every gaze as Mahka led her through the camp. Some eyes held curiosity, others suspicion, a few outright hostility. She walked with her head high, though her heart raced with uncertainty. They approached a large teepee at the center of the camp, elaborately painted with symbols she couldn't interpret. Outside, 5 older men sat in a semicircle, their faces weathered by years and adorned with the markings of status and experience. "The Council of Elders," Mahka explained quietly, "speak truthfully and with respect." Rebecca nodded, steeling herself for what lay ahead. As she faced these men who held her fate in their hands, she touched her brooch and thought of William, drawing strength from his memory. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the courage of a Collins woman. Rebecca stood tall before the Council of Elders, feeling their penetrating gazes assess her worth. She clasped her hands to hide their trembling, determined to show these men the same quiet dignity she taught her students to display in difficult circumstances. The oldest, elder, his face a map of deep lines and experiences Rebecca could only imagine, spoke first in the Lakota language. Maka translated, his deep voice carrying across the hushed gathering. White Feather asks why we should shelter a woman of those who take our lands and break their promises. Rebecca met the elder's eyes directly. I cannot answer for all who have wronged your people. I can only speak for myself. I am a teacher who believes knowledge and understanding build bridges where fear and hatred have built walls. Maka translated her words, and she watched the subtle shifts in the elder's expressions, some softening, others remaining skeptical. A second elder spoke, his voice sharper than the first. Black Elk says you wear the symbol of a soldier. Maka explained, nodding toward her cameo. He asks if you come to learn our ways, only to help those who would destroy us. Rebecca touched William's image through the glass. My husband was a soldier, yes. He died 15 months ago. I wear his likeness to honor his memory, not his uniform. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I came to Dakota Territory to teach children, all children who wish to learn. I have no other purpose. The council deliberated among themselves, while Rebecca stood patiently, acutely aware of the growing crowd of villagers gathering to witness the exchange. Women with children on their hips, young warriors with suspicious eyes, curious elders, all watching to see what would become of the white teacher in their midst. Finally, White Feather spoke again at length, his weathered hands gesturing expressively as he addressed Maka rather than Rebecca. The council has decided, Maka announced when the elder finished. You may remain in our camp until the fighting between our warriors and your soldiers subsides. You will stay in my mother's teepee and help with women's work. When peace returns, I will escort you to your settlement. Relief flooded through Rebecca, though she knew being allowed to stay was only the beginning of her challenges. Thank you, she said, bowing her head respectfully to the council. I will honor your hospitality and traditions. As the gathering dispersed, Maka guided her back toward his mother's teepee. Village life resumed around them, though Rebecca noticed how women pulled their children closer as she passed, how conversations quieted until she was beyond earshot. They fear what they do not understand, Maka said, reading her thoughts, as your people fear mine. Fear is taught, Rebecca replied. And what is taught can be untaught. A small smile touched the corners of Maka's mouth. You speak like one who believes in possibilities, teacher. Without that belief, what purpose would teaching serve? They reached Wichapi's teepee, where the older woman was preparing a meal over the fire. She glanced up as they entered, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. The council allows her to stay, Maka informed his mother. She will help with your work. Wichapi nodded, continuing to stir the contents of her cooking pot. Good. My hands grow old and slow. Young hands will lighten the burden. She pointed to a basket of roots. You can begin by preparing these for the stew. Rebecca settled cross-legged beside the basket, watching carefully as Wichapi demonstrated how to scrape and cut the wild turnips. Her first attempts were clumsy, earning a disapproving click of the tongue from Wichapi. Like this, the older woman corrected, taking Rebecca's hands in her own to guide the movement. Respect what the earth provides, waste nothing. Throughout the afternoon, Rebecca worked alongside Wichapi, learning tasks that pioneer women seldom mastered. How to prepare pemmican, how to stretch and soften hides, how to weave reeds into watertight containers. Her back ached and her fingers grew raw, but she persisted, determined to prove her worth. As evening approached, children's voices outside the teepee grew louder, their play becoming more exuberant as the day's work ended. Rebecca paused in her grinding of dried berries, her heart tugging at the familiar sounds of childhood joy. Wichapi noticed her distraction. "You miss your students." "Yes," Rebecca admitted. "Teaching is more than my work. It's my calling." The older woman studied her for a long moment. "Our children are taught by all the tribe, mothers, fathers, elders, each with different knowledge to share." She gestured toward the teepee entrance. "Perhaps tomorrow you will see how Lakota children learn." The simple invitation warmed Rebecca more than she expected. "I would be honored." Later, as they ate the hearty stew around the fire, Maka returned with news from scouts. "The fighting moves westward," he reported. "Your cavalry pursues our warriors deeper into the sacred hills." "Will there be more battles?" Rebecca asked, concerned about both Lakota lives and the soldiers she had known in the settlement. "There are always more battles when understanding fails," Maka replied, accepting a bowl from his mother. "Until your leaders honor their words and respect our boundaries, blood will continue to soak into the prairie." Rebecca thought of the simplified history she taught her students, the neat lines on maps that ignored ancient claims and sacred connections. "In my classroom," she said slowly, "I teach children that treaties are solemn promises between peoples. But I've seen how easily those promises are broken when gold or land becomes more important than honor." Maka's dark eyes assessed her with new interest. "It is rare for a white teacher to speak such truths." "Truth should not be rare in any teaching," she replied. Their conversation continued as night descended, Maka explaining the complex relationships between the various Lakota bands and their differing approaches to the encroaching settlements. Rebecca found herself fascinated by his perspective, articulate, nuanced, far from the simplistic, savage portrayal common in Eastern newspapers. As the fire burned lower, Wichapi prepared sleeping robes near the teepee's edge. "Rest now," she instructed Rebecca. "Tomorrow brings new work, new learning." Rebecca settled into the soft furs, more comfortable than she expected. Outside, a distant drum began a rhythmic heartbeat, joined by the rise and fall of men's voices in songs she couldn't understand but could feel resonate through the ground beneath her. "They sing of ancestors," Wichapi explained, noticing Rebecca's attentive listening, "of battles won and hunting days remembered." "It's beautiful," Rebecca whispered, letting the music wash over her. Despite her precarious situation, a white woman alone in a Lakota camp during territorial conflicts, she felt a strange peace descending. Here, wrapped in buffalo hides, listening to ancient songs beneath an infinite prairie sky, the rigid boundaries of her previous life seemed to soften. Sleep came easier than she had anticipated, her exhausted body surrendering to the day's events. Her last conscious thought was to wonder what her students would think if they could see their teacher now, learning lessons no settlement school could provide. Morning arrived with a chorus of unfamiliar sounds, women calling to one another, horses nickering, children laughing as they ran between teepees. Rebecca woke disoriented before remembering where she was. Wichapi was already gone, though a small basket of dried berries and a water skin had been left nearby. Rebecca ate quickly, then straightened her borrowed buckskin dress and pinned William's cameo at her throat. Whatever this day might bring, she would face it with dignity and an open mind. Outside, the camp bustled with activity. Women scraped hides stretched on wooden frames. Older children minded younger siblings. Men gathered in small groups, discussing hunting plans or repairing weapons. Rebecca stood uncertainly, unsure where to go or what was expected of her. A small hand slipped into hers, startling her. A girl of about 7 looked up with curious dark eyes, saying something in Lakota that Rebecca couldn't understand. "She asks if you are the woman who came from the stars," translated a voice behind her. Rebecca turned to find a young woman balancing a toddler on her hip. "I am Zintkala, wife of Red Horse. This is my daughter, Willa." "Pleased to meet you," Rebecca replied, smiling at the child who still held her hand. "I'm Rebecca Collins. And no, not from the stars, just from a settlement east of here." Zintkala nodded. "Wichapi sent me to bring you. The women gather to prepare hides for winter. Many hands make the work lighter." She hesitated, then added, "Some women are not happy about your presence, but Wichapi says you work well and without complaint." "High praise indeed," Rebecca said, remembering the older woman's exacting standards from the previous day. Zintkala led her to the edge of the camp, where a dozen women of various ages worked at different stages of the hide tanning process. Some scraped fresh hides with stone tools. Others rubbed mixtures of animal brains and fat into partially processed skins, while the most experienced women smoked the finished leather over smoldering fires. Wichapi looked up from her work, nodding approval at Rebecca's prompt arrival. "You will help Zintkala today. She will teach you to scrape." The work was physically demanding, requiring strength Rebecca didn't know she possessed. By midday, her arms trembled with exhaustion and her back screamed in protest, but she continued without complaint. Gradually, the initial silence of the women gave way to conversation that occasionally included her, with Zintkala translating questions and answers. "How many winters have you seen?" asked an elderly woman with nimble fingers despite her age. 26, Rebecca answered. "And no children?" another woman inquired, clearly finding this unusual. "My husband and I hoped for children, but he died before we were blessed with any." This information traveled quickly among the women, their expressions softening slightly. In their culture, Rebecca learned, widows held a respected position, their grief understood as a journey requiring community support. As they worked, Rebecca observed how the Lakota women incorporated teaching into every task. Young girls watched and assisted, receiving gentle correction when needed and praise when deserved. Stories and songs accompanied the labor, turning work into opportunities for passing down cultural knowledge. "In my schoolhouse," Rebecca told Zintkala during a brief rest, "children sit in rows facing me. Here they learn by your side while doing real work." Zintkala smiled. "How can hands learn what eyes only see? How can hearts know what ears only hear? Our children must feel the hide, smell the smoke, taste the foods. This is knowing." The wisdom in this perspective struck Rebecca deeply. How often had she struggled to engage students with abstract concepts when practical application might have sparked genuine understanding. Their conversation was interrupted by the return of hunting parties, men riding proudly with fresh game secured to their horses. The camp erupted in activity as women prepared to process the new bounty. Rebecca watched as Maka dismounted, a large deer draped across his horse. Unlike some of the younger warriors who boasted loudly of their prowess, he went about his work with quiet competence. He noticed her watching and approached, leaving his horse with a young boy eager for the responsibility. "You work with the women," he observed, glancing at her hands raw from the day's labor. "I'm learning," she replied, "though I fear my first attempts at hide preparation may not yield the finest results." A smile briefly transformed his serious features. "First attempts rarely do. In any skill, it is the willingness to try that matters." He looked past her to where several elders had gathered. "The council wishes to speak with me. We will eat together tonight, and I will tell you what news I have of the fighting." As he walked away, Rebecca became aware of the speculative glances from the women nearby. Zintkala leaned closer, whispering, "The chief shows you special attention. This causes talk." "He's merely being hospitable to a stranger," Rebecca protested, feeling color rise in her cheeks. "Perhaps," Zinkala replied, unconvinced. But Maka has refused many suitable matches since becoming chief. His interest in any woman is noted. Rebecca shook her head firmly. I am a widow still mourning my husband. Lost in territory I don't understand. Any interest is surely just responsibility for my welfare. Zinkala shrugged, returning to her scraping. The heart follows its own trail, not the one we plan. The remainder of the afternoon passed in steady work, with Rebecca gradually improving her technique under Wichapi's critical guidance. By the time the sun began its descent, her muscles ached in ways she'd never experienced, but she felt a surprising satisfaction in having contributed tangibly to the community's winter preparations. Returning to Wichapi's teepee, Rebecca was startled to find a small group of children seated in a semicircle, listening intently as an elderly man told a story punctuated with dramatic gestures. They giggled at his animal impressions and gasped at tense moments in the narrative. Grandfather Spotted Elk teaches the winter stories, Wichapi explained as Rebecca watched. Stories of how the world began, how animals received their natures, how our people learned to live in harmony with the land. In my culture, we have books for our stories, Rebecca said. Words written down so they're never forgotten or changed. Wichapi considered this. Our way, each storyteller adds their spirit to the telling. The story lives and breathes with each new voice. She gestured for Rebecca to join her beside the teepee entrance. Listen, even without understanding the words, you will feel their meaning. Rebecca sat quietly, observing how the children responded to the elder's tale. Though she couldn't comprehend, the language, the universal elements of storytelling transcended words. The rising tension, moments of discovery, lessons embedded in adventure. Most striking was the children's engagement, so different from the restless, fidgeting common in her schoolroom during reading lessons. When Spotted Elk finished, the children peppered him with questions that he answered patiently, encouraging their curiosity rather than demanding rote repetition. After the impromptu class dispersed, he noticed Rebecca and approached, speaking to Wichapi while glancing curiously at the white teacher. He asks if you tell stories to your students. Wichapi translated. Yes, though perhaps not as well as he does, Rebecca replied. Reading stories from books is an important part of our education. When Wichapi conveyed this, Spotted Elk nodded thoughtfully, then spoke again at length. He says perhaps tomorrow you will share one of your stories with our children. Wichapi reported. He believes different stories, like different plants, nourish the mind in different ways. Rebecca was stunned by the invitation. I would be honored, but I have no books with me and the children don't speak English. You have stories in your heart, yes? And hands to show meaning when words fail? The challenge intrigued her. What stories might bridge these seemingly separate worlds? Which universal themes might resonate across the cultural divide? Please tell him I accept, she said finally. I will prepare something for tomorrow. Spotted Elk smiled when her response was translated, bowing slightly before taking his leave. Rebecca watched him go, her mind already sifting through possibilities, folk tales, fables, perhaps even biblical parables stripped of their religious framing to focus on their moral essence. As twilight deepened, Maka returned as promised, bringing with him news gathered from scouts and signal fires. They sat around Wichapi's cooking fire, the flames illuminating their faces as he described the movements of troops and warriors across the contested territory. The fighting has moved beyond Black Hills, he reported. Your cavalry suffered losses near Thunder Creek, but continues to pursue our southern bands. What about the settlement? Rebecca asked, thinking of her students and the school awaiting her return. Has there been any fighting there? Our scouts report it is untouched. Your people have gathered inside their wooden fortress, but no war parties have approached. He studied her reaction carefully. "You wish to return." It wasn't a question, but Rebecca answered anyway. "I have responsibilities, children who depend on me. But," she added, looking from Wichapi to Mahka, "I am grateful for your protection and for what I'm learning here." "The learning goes both ways," Mahka said unexpectedly. "Already the children ask questions about the white teacher, who works without complaint and watches our stories with respect." Wichapi nodded agreement. "Spotted Elk says you have eyes that truly see, not just look." Rebecca was touched by their assessment. "Among my people, there are many who believe your ways are primitive, your culture simple. They are wrong. What I've seen here, your community, your teaching methods, your relationship with the land, there is wisdom my own society could learn from. Yet your society believes they must teach us, change us, remake us in their image," Mahka replied, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "Your government sends men with paper promises in one hand and rifles in the other." Rebecca couldn't deny the truth in his words. "There are those among us who believe in peace and mutual respect, who understand that different doesn't mean lesser." She paused, considering how to express concepts deeply ingrained in her worldview. True education isn't about erasing differences, but understanding them, finding connections while honoring distinctions. Mahka translated her words for his mother, who had been listening intently despite the language barrier. Wichapi responded with a short statement, her weathered face thoughtful. "My mother says you speak with a good heart," Mahka conveyed. "But good hearts alone cannot stop the tide of your people coming to our lands." The harsh reality hung in the air between them. Rebecca had no counter to this fundamental truth, no solution to the inexorable westward expansion that threatened the Lakota way of life. For all her ideals about education and understanding, she belonged to the society steadily pushing native peoples from their ancestral homes. "I don't have answers," she admitted finally. "Only questions, and the belief that there must be a better path than bloodshed and broken promises." They ate in contemplative silence after that, each lost in private thoughts about the wider conflicts that had brought them together in this unlikely circumstance. As the fire burned lower, Rebecca found herself studying Mahka's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the quiet dignity in his bearing, the intelligence in his eyes that defied every simplistic portrayal of savage leaders she'd encountered in Eastern newspapers. He caught her watching and held her gaze for a moment that stretched beyond comfort. Rebecca looked away first, suddenly conscious of Zintkala's earlier observations about the chief's attention toward her. "Tomorrow I will take you to the river," Mahka said as he rose to leave. "There is something there you should see, something that might help with the story you'll tell our children." After he departed, Rebecca helped Wichapi prepare for sleep, her mind filled with the day's experiences and the unexpected invitation to share stories with Lakota children. As she settled into her sleeping robes, exhaustion from the day's physical work quickly overcame her racing thoughts. Her dreams that night were a strange blend of worlds, her students seated in a circle inside a teepee, William and Mahka standing side by side on a bluff overlooking the prairie, maps whose boundaries shifted like ripples in water. She woke with fragments of these images still clinging to her consciousness, and a growing certainty that her time in this camp would forever alter her understanding of education, community, and her own place in the contested territories. Dawn brought a light rain, unusual for the season. Rebecca emerged from the teepee to find the camp quieter than the previous day, with most activities moved inside the sheltering dwellings. Wichapi had already joined a gathering of older women in a nearby teepee, leaving Rebecca wondering about her plans for the day. Her uncertainty was resolved by Mahka's appearance, a heavy buffalo robe draped over his shoulders as protection against the drizzle. "The river still waits," he said simply. Unless you fear a little rain? Rebecca straightened her shoulders. Collins' women aren't deterred by weather. Something like approval flickered in his expression. He handed her a smaller robe, similar to his own. The river is not far, but water from above and water from below make double challenge. They set out together, walking in comfortable silence through the damp morning. The rain softened the landscape, muting colors and sounds, creating an intimate space that made Rebecca acutely aware of her companion. She stole glances at his profile, noting how he moved with perfect confidence, even when the path became slippery or obscured. "You said there was something I should see," she prompted, as they neared the sound of flowing water. "Yes, something that speaks without words." Marka led her around a bend in the path, and suddenly the river lay before them. Not the raging torrent she had expected, but a gentle flow winding through the prairie. And there, on the near bank, stood a sight that made Rebecca catch her breath. Hundreds of small stone formations, carefully balanced one atop another, creating an otherworldly forest of delicate sculptures. "What are they?" she whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might cause the balanced stones to tumble. "We call them spirit markers," Marka explained, "each one placed by a person seeking guidance or giving thanks. Some mark important decisions, others commemorate events, many are prayers made visible." Rebecca moved carefully among the stone formations, marveling at their precarious balance and the patience required to create them. "They're beautiful." "They are temporary," Marka corrected. "Spring floods will wash most away. New ones will be built. This is their teaching. Balance is possible, but not permanent. It must be recreated when lost." The profound simplicity of this lesson struck Rebecca deeply. How often had she struggled to help her students understand abstract concepts like perseverance, harmony, and resilience. Here, embedded in these silent stone teachers, were all those lessons and more. "I know what story I will tell the children now," she said softly. Marka raised an eyebrow in question. "And the story of a bridge," Rebecca explained, feeling the narrative take shape in her mind, not built of wood or stone, but of understanding. A bridge that must be rebuilt whenever floods wash it away. He nodded slowly. A good teaching. For all children, perhaps. They stood together in the gentle rain, surrounded by balanced stones and flowing water, each contemplating bridges between worlds that seemed increasingly possible, if fragile, as the structures before them. The story gathering that afternoon transformed Rebecca's understanding of what teaching could be. Seated on a woven mat, with a semicircle of Lakota children before her, she felt both teacher and student, both giver and receiver of wisdom. "Remember," Spotted Elk had advised through Zintkala's translation, "stories cross rivers that words alone cannot. Speak with your hands, your face, your heart." Rebecca had chosen carefully, not a tale from her schoolbooks with their implicit messages of white civilization's superiority, nor a story so culturally specific that its meaning would be lost in translation. Instead, she crafted a narrative about a young bird who falls from its nest during a storm, is rescued by animals it had been taught to fear, and learns that courage often means questioning what you've always believed. As she began, her audience watched with wary curiosity, but soon, through expressive gestures, dramatic facial expressions, and the universal language of storytelling, barriers dissolved. Children leaned forward, eyes wide with anticipation during tense moments. They giggled when Rebecca mimicked the different animals, and they nodded with serious contemplation during the story's resolution. Spotted Elk, observing from nearby, nodded his approval when she finished. Through Zintkala, he said, "Your story has good medicine. It teaches without preaching, questions without disrespecting, All the best stories do, Rebecca replied, watching as the children dispersed, several of them reenacting her animal gestures with delighted laughter. Wichapi, who had paused in her work to listen, approached with an unreadable expression. "You understand teaching is not filling empty vessels," she observed. "It is lighting fires that burn with their own flame." "My own teachers taught me that," Rebecca acknowledged, "though I sometimes forget in the rush to cover arithmetic and geography." The older woman studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps the Great Spirit brought you here to remember." This simple statement lingered with Rebecca throughout the evening meal, where she found herself included in conversations with growing ease. The language barrier remained, but gestures, expressions, and occasional translations created a communication that transcended words alone. Maka joined them as darkness fell, bringing news that troubled the camp's tranquility. "Soldiers moved north from Fort Riley," he reported. "Many soldiers, with wagon guns." "Cannon," Rebecca translated the term for herself, her heart sinking. "Are they headed this way?" "Their path would cross ours within 3 days' ride," Maka confirmed. "The council meets tonight to decide if we should break camp." Rebecca thought of the elaborate village. Dozens of teepees, storage caches, smoking racks, all the infrastructure of a community with deep connection to this particular bend in the river. "Would you leave because of me?" she asked, horrified. At the possibility, Maka shook his head. "Not you alone. The weather turns soon. First snow will come earlier this year. We plan to move to winter camp within a fortnight. Perhaps now we go sooner." As he departed for the council meeting, Rebecca helped Wichapi with evening tasks, her mind troubled by the expanding ripples of conflict that threatened both her worlds. The Lakota village had shown her a form of education, community, and connection to nature that deserved protection and respect. Yet she also thought of her little schoolhouse, of Emma and Thomas and the other children who depended on her return. "Your thoughts travel far," Wichapi observed, handing her a bone needle and sinew thread to repair a torn garment. "I think of bridges," Rebecca replied, focusing on the unfamiliar stitching technique, "of how to build them when rivers run high, with mistrust." "Ah!" Wichapi's weathered hands continued their skilled work. "Bridges need anchors on both shores. Your people, do they want such bridges?" The question struck at the heart of Rebecca's growing dilemma. Did the settlement truly want understanding or merely compliance? Did military leaders seek peace or submission? Her own desires for mutual respect and learning seemed increasingly naive against the backdrop of territorial aggression. "Some do," she said finally. "Not all, but some. Enough to start with, perhaps." When Maka returned well after midnight, his expression told the council's decision before he spoke. "We move at dawn," he announced, "toward the winter grounds near Black Spirit Hills." Wichapi immediately began organizing their belongings, her efficiency born of countless such relocations. Rebecca moved to help, following the older woman's directions as they packed cooking utensils, sleeping robes, and personal items. "What about me?" she asked Maka during a brief pause. "Will you still take me back to the settlement?" "The path is not safe now," he replied. "Too many soldiers, too many angry warriors. You must come with us to winter camp." Seeing her expression, he added, "When snow blocks the passes, fighting will pause. Then I will take you home." Home. The word echoed strangely in Rebecca's mind. After just a few days among the Lakota, her definition of home had already begun to shift and expand. The settlement was her responsibility, her duty, but this nomadic community had awakened something long dormant within her spirit. "I'll help, however I can," she promised, returning to the packing with renewed purpose. Dawn revealed an astonishing transformation. The village that had seemed so permanent was rapidly disassembling into transportable components. Tippy poles lashed to travois, dragged by horses, possessions bundled into parfleches, children carrying smaller items while women efficiently directed the organized chaos. Rebecca worked alongside Wichapi, learning the precise way to pack foods, to prevent spoilage, how to secure loads that would travel for days without shifting. The physical labor left little time for worry or second-guessing. "You adapt quickly," Zintkala commented as they loaded a travois together. Many white women would be weeping by now. "Collins women are made of sterner stuff," Rebecca replied with a small smile, echoing her father's words that had become a personal mantra. By mid-morning, the village existed only as a memory and trampled grass. The procession stretched across the prairie, mounted warriors scouting ahead and protecting flanks, families walking or riding in the center, heavily laden horses bringing up the rear. Rebecca walked beside Wichapi, who, despite her age, maintained a steady pace that younger women respected. The journey became a mobile classroom for Rebecca. Each rest stop brought new knowledge: which plants provided water when streams were distant, how to read weather from cloud patterns, ways to ease blistered feet with certain leaves. She absorbed it all, aware that she was receiving education few white teachers ever experienced. "The learning seems to flow in only one direction," she commented to Maka when he dropped back from his leading position to check on the columns. "Progress. You teach me so much while I offer little in return." "Your presence teaches," he replied unexpectedly. "The children watch how you try, fail, try again without complaint. The women note how you respect our ways without judging them. Lesser than your own. Even the warriors learn from seeing a white woman walk beside us by choice, not captivity." This perspective humbled her. I hadn't considered that. A teacher is always teaching, even when silent. Maka gestured toward the horizon. "Like the sun, which teaches us direction even behind clouds." They traveled until dusk, making impressive distance before establishing a temporary camp, far simpler than the village they'd left behind. Rebecca's muscles ached from the unaccustomed walking, but she worked without complaint to help erect Wichapi's teepee and prepare the evening meal. That night, too exhausted for extended conversation, she fell asleep immediately upon lying down. Her dreams were a confused blend of worlds: her schoolhouse somehow transposed onto the prairie, William and her father walking with spotted elk along a river of balanced stones, children from both cultures playing together while adults looked on with expressions she couldn't interpret. She woke to Wichapi's gentle prod and the smell of morning cook fires. The day promised to be warmer than the previous one, the late autumn sun asserting itself against the approaching winter. As they resumed their journey, Rebecca found herself walking alongside a young woman who carried an infant in a beautifully beaded carrier. The mother, who introduced herself as Standing Fawn, spoke enough English to engage in simple conversation. "Your husband," Standing Fawn asked with direct curiosity, "how did he walk to the spirit world?" Rebecca explained William's death in the brief, factual manner she'd grown accustomed to using. But Standing Fawn shook her head, unsatisfied. "No, how did his spirit leave? Was it prepared? Did he have good crossing?" The question struck Rebecca differently than the usual condolences she received. Not how did she feel, or how was she managing, but how had William's spirit been honored in its transition? "There was a funeral," she said slowly. "Prayers were said. His body was buried in the settlement cemetery." Standing Fawn nodded. "And you? How do you help his journey continue?" I'm not sure I understand." "Death is not end," the young mother explained patiently. "Those who walk ahead need our stories, our remembering, our living well to light their path." This concept of active responsibility toward the dead not just remembering them, but somehow participating in their ongoing spiritual journey, was entirely new to Rebecca. She thought of how she'd preserved William's memory. The cameo, she wore his compass in her desk drawer, his letters read in private moments of grief. "I honor him by teaching," she said finally. "It was what he wanted for me, to use my gifts." Standing Fawn smiled approvingly. "Good medicine. When you teach with heart, his spirit strengthens." Their conversation continued throughout the morning, touching on childbirth, marriage customs, beliefs about dreams and omens. Rebecca found herself sharing aspects of her life she rarely discussed with other settlement women, while absorbing perspectives that expanded her understanding of human experience. By the third day of travel, Rebecca had settled into the rhythm of nomadic life. Her body, initially protesting the unaccustomed exertion, began to adapt. Her hands, soft from years of schoolroom work, toughened. Most significantly, her mind expanded to accommodate new ways of seeing the world around her. "You walk differently now," Maka observed when they stopped to water the horses at a shallow stream. "More." He searched for the English word, "Dejan," connected to earth. Rebecca considered this. "I'm noticing things I never saw before, how grassland shifts to reveal watersheds, which birds appear at different times of day, the way wind carries different scents before weather changes." "This is good learning," he approved. "Many whites look but never see." "We're taught to conquer nature, not commune with it," she admitted, "to view the land as something to be subdued and improved upon." Maka bent to drink from the stream, then straightened, water droplets catching sunlight in his dark hair. "How can you improve what Great Spirit made perfect?" The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely puzzled. Rebecca found herself without ready answer, confronting assumptions she'd never examined. As they traveled further from her familiar territory, Rebecca began recording her observations in the journal her students had given her. Each evening by firelight, she documented not just events, but insights, comparisons between Lakota educational approaches and her own, notes on sustainable practices that allowed the tribe to live harmoniously with their environment, reflections on community structures that supported collective well-being. "Perhaps," she wrote one night, "true civilization isn't measured by buildings and machines, but by how well a people sustains both themselves and the world that sustains them." Wichapi, observing her writing, asked through gestures what she recorded. When Rebecca explained, the older woman nodded approval. "Good to make marks that remember," she said in her limited English. "When you go back, teach children truth." The simple directive carried profound implications. What truths could Rebecca bring back to her schoolroom? How might her curriculum change to incorporate the wisdom she was gathering? What resistance would she face from parents and authorities if she presented perspectives that contradicted established narratives about savage peoples? These questions accompanied her as the band continued its journey toward winter grounds. On the seventh day, they began ascending into foothills, the landscape changing from open prairie to scattered pine forests and protected valleys. Game became more abundant, and hunting parties returned with deer and elk that would provide essential provisions for the coming months. Rebecca's status within the group had evolved substantially. Children now ran to her with discoveries, unusual stones, feathers, plant specimens. Knowing she would share their excitement, women included her in their work circles without the earlier reserve. Even some of the warriors acknowledged her with respectful nods rather than suspicious glances. Most significant was her changing relationship with Maka. Their conversations had deepened beyond immediate practical concerns to philosophical discussions about leadership, education, and the uncertain future facing both their peoples. Rebecca found in him an intellect that matched her own, a perspective that challenged her assumptions, and a quiet dignity that increasingly drew her admiration. "Your husband," he asked during a rare moment of private conversation while they gathered firewood. Was he a good man? Yes, Rebecca answered without hesitation. Kind, principled, devoted to what he believed was right. Even when what he believed meant fighting my people. The question wasn't accusatory, merely thoughtful. Rebecca considered it carefully. William believed he was protecting innocent settlers from attacks. He saw only part of the picture, as I did, until now. She reached for another fallen branch. He was a good man working within a flawed understanding. Marka absorbed this, breaking a larger branch into manageable pieces. Many conflicts begin this way, good people with partial visions, believing they see the whole. Rebecca was struck by the generosity of this perspective. You don't blame him? A man can only walk the path visible to him. Marka straightened, arms full of firewood. I honor warriors who fight for their people's protection, even when they are my enemies. This glimpse into Lakota philosophy, its capacity to respect adversaries while opposing their actions, revealed a sophistication that contradicted every savage stereotype Rebecca had encountered in Eastern newspapers. As they walked back to camp together, Rebecca found herself studying Marka's profile against the sunset. The strong line of his jaw, the quiet confidence in his bearing, the responsibility he carried for his people's welfare. Something stirred within her that she hadn't felt since William's death, a recognition that both thrilled and terrified her. Zintkala, observing their return, raised a knowing eyebrow, but said nothing. The women's circle had their own silent communication, and Rebecca was becoming fluent enough to read their subtle signals. Her growing connection to Marka had not gone unnoticed. That evening, as the band prepared their first substantial camp, since leaving the river settlement, Spotted Elk called for stories around the central fire. Rebecca sat with Wichapi, watching as different community members shared tales, some humorous, others instructive, many weaving supernatural elements. With practical wisdom, when Spotted Elk gestured for her to contribute, Rebecca hesitated only briefly before accepting the invitation. With Zintkala translating key phrases, she told a story from her childhood, not one from books, but her grandmother's tale about a fox who learned that cleverness without kindness leads to ultimate isolation. The response was enthusiastic, with children immediately mimicking her fox gestures and adults nodding at the moral's universal application. Marka, seated with the council of elders, watched her with an intensity that she felt rather than saw. Later, as people dispersed to their family fires, he approached. Your story honored both your traditions and ours, he said. You begin to walk between worlds. The phrase lodged in her consciousness, walking between worlds, wasn't that what education at its best should enable? Not abandoning one perspective for another, but developing the capacity to see through multiple lenses, to translate understanding across divides. Is that possible, she asked, to truly belong to both? Marka looked toward the stars emerging in the darkening sky. The moon belongs to night, but visits day. The eagle flies in sky, but nests on earth. He turned back to her. Difficult paths are still paths. The following days brought them deeper into the sheltered valley that would serve as winter camp. Evidence of previous occupations became apparent. Established fire pits, sturdy drying racks, stone-lined storage caches. This was clearly a traditional wintering ground, chosen for its strategic advantages: protection from harsh winds, abundant game, accessible water, and defensible approaches. Rebecca helped establish the new encampment, marveling at how quickly an empty landscape transformed into a functional community. Unlike the settlements she knew, which imposed geometric order onto nature, the Lakota arrangement worked with natural contours and features. each tipi positioned to maximize natural protection while maintaining essential community connections. 10 days after departing the river encampment, the winter camp was fully established. Hunting parties worked tirelessly to build food reserves before deep snow arrived. Women processed hides, preserved meat, gathered late-season plants, and prepared for the months of confinement ahead. Children continued their education through stories, games, and apprenticeship in essential skills. Rebecca found her place in this intricate social web, contributing where her skills proved useful, helping younger children learn counting games, assisting with food preservation, even beginning to master basic phrases in Lakota while sharing English words in return. One crisp morning, Wichapi presented her with a completed project they had been working on together. A winter dress of soft deer hide, beautifully adorned with subtle beadwork along the yoke and fringe at the sleeves. "For teacher," Wichapi said, her weathered face showing rare pleasure, "for winter moons." Rebecca accepted the gift with proper Lakota formality, deeply moved by its significance. This wasn't merely practical clothing, but symbolic acceptance. She had earned a place, however temporary, in this community. She retired to the tipi to change, emerging in her new garment to appreciative nods from the women. When she approached the central cooking area to help with morning preparations, Zintkala grinned. "Now you look like one of us," she teased, "except for your hair and eyes." "And my accent," Rebecca added ruefully, still struggling with Lakota pronunciation. "And your many questions," Zintkala continued the good-natured list. "Always asking. Why, how, when?" "Teachers are the worst students," Rebecca admitted. "We never stop questioning." "This is good medicine," Spotted Elk commented as he passed, having overheard their exchange. "Questions keep minds young, like stretching keeps bodies strong." Throughout that day, Rebecca noted subtle shifts in how people interacted with her. The dress represented a transition, not to full tribal membership, which would be presumptuous, but to acknowledge guest with defined place and purpose. Children approached her more freely. Elders included her in conversations that previously excluded her, and even some of the more reserved warriors acknowledged her with respectful nods. Maka, returning from a hunting expedition that afternoon, stopped abruptly when he saw her in traditional dress. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, appreciation, and something deeper that made Rebecca's heart beat faster. "Wichapi's work," he observed, recovering his composure. "She honors you." "I'm honored to receive it," Rebecca replied, "though I fear I don't deserve such craftsmanship." "Deserve comes from heart, not blood," he said simply. Then, changing, "The subject, the council meets tonight. There is news from the east you should hear." The meeting gathered after evening meal, with Rebecca included at Maka's insistence, despite some elders' reservations about having an outsider present for tribal deliberations. "She is part of this," Maka argued in Lakota, which Rebecca now understood fractionally. What comes affects her too. The news, delivered by scouts who had observed military movements from concealed positions, confirmed earlier concerns. A significant cavalry force had established a new outpost near Rebecca's settlement, explicitly tasked with pacifying hostile elements throughout the territory. Worse, civilian militias had formed in response to exaggerated reports of Lakota raids, creating unpredictable threats that even the military commanders couldn't fully control. "They will search for you," Black Elk told Rebecca directly, his English halting but determined. "White woman missing, they think we take you." The implication settled heavily. Her continued absence wasn't merely a personal matter or teaching disruption. It had become potential justification for increased military aggression against the very people who had saved and sheltered her. "I should return," she said, looking from face to face in the council circle. "Explain what happened. Tell the truth about your kindness." White Feather shook his head, speaking at length in Lakota while Maka translated. "He says your words. would not be believed. Those seeking war would claim we forced your speech, or that you suffer from captivity sickness that affects the mind. Marker's expression revealed his agreement with this assessment, and the journey now would risk your life. The council discussed options well into the night, weighing risks against necessities, immediate dangers against long-term threats. Rebecca listened, catching phrases here and there, understanding enough to follow the general flow, if not every detail. Their conclusion, when finally reached, reflected pragmatic wisdom. They would maintain the winter camp as planned, but send messages through trusted mixed-blood traders to specific military officers known for relative fairness. These messages would confirm Rebecca's safety and voluntary presence without revealing the camp's exact location. When deepest winter passes, Marker informed her as the council dispersed, I will take you home. Home. The word again provoked complicated emotions. After nearly 3 weeks with the Lakota, Rebecca's sense of belonging had become increasingly divided. Her responsibilities to her students remained clear, but her understanding of what and how she should teach them had transformed dramatically. That night, writing by the light of Whichapi's small fire, Rebecca confronted her divided heart directly. I came to Dakota Territory believing education meant bringing civilization to frontier children. Now, I question whose definition of civilization should prevail. The Lakota have systems of education, governance, spirituality, and sustainable living that Eastern society might well study rather than destroy. How do I honor both worlds? How do I teach respect for what my own culture seems determined to eliminate? And how do I reconcile my duty to return with the growing certainty that I will leave part of my heart in this winter camp when I go? She closed the journal without answering these questions, watching the fire's dying embers while Whichapi's gentle snores provided counterpoint to the wind's whispers outside. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new learning, new challenges in walking between worlds. For tonight, it was enough to acknowledge that her journey had become far more profound than a simple trip for school supplies. Rebecca was becoming a bridge in human form, not yet knowing if either shore truly wanted the connection she embodied, but increasingly certain that building such passages between divided peoples was the most important teaching she would ever undertake. The first snow fell 3 weeks after they established the winter camp, blanketing the valley in pristine white that transformed familiar surroundings into an ethereal landscape. Rebecca stood at the teepee entrance, breath clouding in the morning air as she watched children race to make the first footprints in the perfect expanse. They celebrate the white season, Whichapi said, joining her, when earth rests beneath her blanket. Our minds grow in the telling time. Rebecca had come to appreciate these telling times, the long winter evenings when families gathered to share stories, histories, and lessons that couldn't be conveyed during the busy seasons of hunting and harvesting. In just 1 month with the Lakota, she had absorbed more about their sophisticated educational methods than any anthropological text could have provided. In my settlement, she confided, winter is often seen as something to be endured rather than celebrated. We close ourselves away from it, fighting against its presence rather than working with its rhythm. Whichapi nodded. Your people live against nature, not with her. This makes life harder than needed. The simple observation crystallized something Rebecca had been struggling to articulate in her journal. The fundamental difference wasn't technology or religion or even language. It was a relationship to the natural world. One culture positioned itself as master, the other as interdependent partner. A whoop of joy drew their attention as children engaged in an impromptu snow battle, packing the fresh powder into projectiles that sailed through the crisp air. Among them, Rebecca recognized a small boy who had been particularly shy around her when she first arrived. Now he waved enthusiastically, inviting her to join their play with dramatic gestures. Small eagle welcomes you to winter games, Wichapi interpreted, amusement crinkling the corners of her eyes. You should go. Old bones like mine prefer fire's warmth. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before joining the children, her dignity as teacher momentarily set aside in favor of joyful participation. Soon she was laughing alongside them, learning the rules of their snow games through demonstration rather than explanation. When Maka found her an hour later, her cheeks were flushed with cold and exertion, her borrowed winter moccasins soaked through. He watched the scene with unguarded pleasure before making his presence known. "The council wonders where our visitor has gone," he called. "Now I see she leads a different council of snow warriors." The children giggled at his teasing tone, several of them running to show him their snow creations. Rebecca brushed ice crystals from her skirt, suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance. "I was learning important cultural practices," she explained with mock seriousness. "The strategic deployment of snow ammunition requires careful study." Maka's laugh was unexpected and wonderful, a full, rich sound she had heard only rarely from the typically composed chief. "Indeed, and what conclusions has the teacher reached?" "That I have much to learn about Lakota battle tactics," she admitted, showing him her snow-covered back where the children had successfully ambushed her. "My students never dared such bold attacks." "Perhaps they should," he suggested, surprising. Her play teaches courage, strategy, cooperation better than many serious lessons. This insight joined countless others Rebecca had collected about Lakota educational philosophy. The seamless integration of practical skills with values development, the absence of arbitrary distinctions between work and play, the way every activity served multiple purposes in children's formation. As they walked back toward the central camp area, Maka grew more serious. "The council has decided to hold winter counting ceremony tonight. It is important time for teaching tribal history." "Winter counting?" Rebecca asked. "Each winter, we add new marks to our counting hide, pictures that remember the most important event of past year. By reading these marks, our children learn their people's journey through time." Rebecca immediately recognized the pedagogical brilliance of this system, a visual historical record that could be collectively interpreted and discussed, embedding important events in community memory through shared storytelling rather than individual reading. "Will I be permitted to observe?" she asked, careful to respect potential boundaries around sacred or private traditions. "More than observe," Maka replied. "Council wishes you to add mark for your arrival among us." The honor rendered her momentarily speechless. "But I'm not Lakota." "Your coming is part of our winter's story now," he said simply. "Future children should know of the teacher who walked between worlds." That evening, the entire band gathered in a large council teepee specially erected for significant ceremonies. Elders sat in positions of honor, with families arranged in concentric circles around a central fire. Rebecca was given a place near Wichapi, who explained in whispers and gestures what she couldn't otherwise understand. White Feather, as eldest council member, unrolled a large hide covered with pictographic symbols arranged in spiral pattern. Each image, simple but distinctive, represented a year in the band's history: a meteor shower, a particularly harsh winter, first contact with white traders, an important treaty, significant battles or peace agreements. One by one, elders rose to interpret specific symbols, sharing the stories attached to each. Though Rebecca couldn't understand the Lakota narratives directly, the emotional resonance transcended language. Pride in victories, sorrow for losses, humor for misadventures, wisdom gained through challenges overcome. This is how memory lives. Beyond one life, Wichapi explained during a brief pause, each generation adds stories to those that came before. When all the existing symbols had been discussed and their lessons extracted, Spotted Elk brought forth painting materials made from natural pigments. This year's edition would commemorate the most significant event of the passing seasons. To Rebecca's astonishment, Marca gestured for her to join the council circle. "Our most remembered event this turning," he announced in English for her. Benefit then repeated in Lakota, "is the coming of the teacher who walks with open eyes and heart between our worlds." Black Elk, who had initially been among her strongest skeptics, handed her a small painting tool. "Make your mark," he said, his English halting but clear, "so our children's children will know." With hands that trembled slightly from emotion, Rebecca considered what symbol might best represent this unexpected intersection of lives and cultures. After a moment's reflection, she painted a simple image: two teepees facing each other with a figure standing between them, arms extended toward, both in a gesture of connection. When she finished, the elders studied her contribution with thoughtful expressions. White Feather spoke at length, with Marca translating. "He says your mark shows wisdom. The space between different lodges is where new understanding grows. This will teach future generations to look beyond their own fires for knowledge." The ceremony continued with songs and prayers Rebecca couldn't comprehend, but could feel resonating through the gathered community. When it concluded, people lingered, in small groups, discussing the histories they'd revisited and adding personal memories to the collective narrative. Marca found her watching the interactions with fascinated attention. "What do you think of our history keeping?" he asked. "It's brilliant," she replied without hesitation. "In my schools, history is something distant, dates and facts to memorize, from books written by people who weren't present. Your winter counting makes history alive, personal, connected to those who experienced it." Yes, history should live in hearts, not just in head. He gestured toward where some elders were showing younger children specific symbols on the hide, explaining their significance. "Now you are part of this living story." The realization both honored and humbled her. "I hope the mark I've left will be worthy of remembrance." Something shifted in Marca's expression, a momentary vulnerability quickly concealed. "Some marks go deeper than hide," he said quietly, then excused himself to speak with council members. Rebecca watched him. "Go!" her heart beating unnaturally fast. Zintkala, who had observed their exchange, approached with knowing eyes. "The chief speaks words with double meanings," she commented. "One for ears, one for heart." "I'm sure he's just being polite to a visitor," Rebecca demurred, though she knew the explanation rang hollow even to her own ears. Zintkala shook her head. "Marca is many things: wise leader, skilled hunter, respected medicine man, but not one who speaks empty courtesy." She adjusted her sleeping child on her back. "Be careful with his heart, teacher. It has known much sorrow." As winter deepened, Rebecca's integration into the camp's daily rhythms became increasingly seamless. Her Lakota vocabulary expanded steadily, allowing simple conversations without translation. Her hands grew skilled at women's crafts, beadwork, hide preparation, food preservation. Most significantly, her teaching abilities found new expression within Lakota educational traditions. What began as her observation of children's lessons evolved into a natural exchange of methods and knowledge. She introduced simple English words through songs and games. In return, Lakota children taught her their counting systems, plant classifications, and geographical knowledge. "Your ways of teaching and our ways can strengthen each other," Spotted Elk observed after watching one such exchange. "Like braiding weak fibers into strong rope." This metaphor captured precisely what Rebecca had begun to envision for her own classroom. An integrated approach that honored both the academic rigor of her formal training and the holistic wisdom of Lakota pedagogy. If when she returned to her settlement school, she would bring transformative insights about how children truly learn. As solstice approached, bringing the longest nights of the year, camp activities centered increasingly around the teepees rather than the broader landscape now buried under deep snow. Families gathered for intricate crafting, storytelling, and preparation for midwinter ceremonies. Rebecca sat with Wichapi one evening, learning to create elaborate porcupine quill decorations for a ceremonial pouch, the meticulous work required. Absolute concentration, teaching patience and precision through practice rather than instruction. "Tell me about your childhood teachers," Wichapi requested unexpectedly, "those who showed you your path." Rebecca smiled at the memory. "My father was my first teacher. He believed girls should learn everything boys did, reading, mathematics, philosophical ideas. This wasn't common in my childhood home." Her fingers continued the careful quill work as she spoke. "At school, I had a teacher named Miss Abernathy, who saw something in me others missed. She gave me books beyond my years and challenged me to question everything I read. Good teachers see the person hiding inside," Wichapi nodded approvingly, "like seeing oak tree inside small acorn." "What about you?" Rebecca asked. "Who were your teachers?" The older woman's weathered hands never paused in their skilled movements. "My grandmother taught plant medicine, which leaves heal wounds, which roots cure winter coughs, which barks reduce fevers. My mother taught woman's wisdom, how to birth babies, how to grieve losses, how to love with open hands that don't grasp too tightly." "They sound like remarkable women." "All women are remarkable when seen clearly," Wichapi replied. "Your world often puts cloth over eyes when looking at women's knowledge." This observation joined many others Rebecca had recorded in her increasingly full journal, incisive critiques of her own culture's blind spots that had become visible only through the lens of another perspective. The Lakota weren't perfect. She had observed political disagreements, social tensions, and individual failings within the band. But their society possessed strengths her own could learn from, particularly regarding communal responsibility and environmental stewardship. Several days later, Rebecca woke to find the camp preparing for an unexpected arrival. Scouts had reported a small party of mixed-blood traders approaching from the east, bringing news and potential trade goods despite the challenging winter travel conditions. "They bring words from your settlements," Maka informed her as the camp readied to receive the visitors. "Perhaps news of your students." Rebecca's heart leapt at this possibility. Though she had adapted remarkably well to Lakota life, her concern for the children she'd left behind remained constant. "Will I be able to speak with them directly?" "Of course. These men walk between worlds as you do, speak English, Lakota, French as needed. They are our eyes and ears beyond winter grounds." The trading party arrived mid-afternoon. 3 men of mixed European and native ancestry whose dress and equipment reflected their bicultural identities. They brought precious commodities: coffee, sugar, metal tools, ammunition, and most valuably for Rebecca, news. After formal welcoming ceremonies and preliminary trade discussions, the leader of the group, who introduced himself as Henri Boucher, spoke with Rebecca privately while Maka and other council members listened. "Your settlement believes you dead, madame," he explained candidly. "The soldiers who abandoned you reported Lakota attack, claimed all killed or captured." "That's a lie," Rebecca responded firmly. "I was deliberately left behind while they fled. Chief Maka saved my life." Boucher nodded, unsurprised. "Such lies are common currency in territory disputes. Your disappearance has become excuse for increased military presence. New fort being built near your settlement, more troops arriving weekly." The implications settled heavily. Her absence was being manipulated to justify exactly what Maka and the council had feared: escalated aggression against the Lakota. "I must return," she said, looking toward Maka with troubled eyes. Tell the truth about what really happened. Winter passes make journey impossible now, Boucher cautioned, and truth may find unwelcoming ears. Those who abandoned you have power to protect their version of events. I don't care. My silence makes me complicit in their lies. After further discussion, a compromise emerged. Rebecca would write detailed letters explaining her actual experiences, which the traders would deliver to multiple recipients when they continued their circuit after the winter storms abated. One to the settlement's leader, one to the territorial governor, one to her students' parents collectively, and one to a newspaper editor Boucher knew to be relatively fair-minded about native affairs. For hours that evening, Rebecca worked by firelight, carefully crafting narratives that balanced absolute factual truth about her abandonment with compelling descriptions of the Lakota community that had welcomed her. She emphasized the sophistication of their educational practices, governance systems, and sustainable living patterns, directly challenging prevailing stereotypes without romanticizing or oversimplifying. These words may build bridges or burn them, she acknowledged to Maka when she shared the finished letters. But silence builds nothing at all. He read the English pages slowly, his expression unreadable. You speak truth, with respect, he finally said. This is good medicine, whatever grows from it. The traders remained for 3 days, exchanging goods and information, strengthening the tenuous connections between isolated winter communities. When they departed, carrying Rebecca's letters and small gifts she'd made for her students, the camp settled back into its midwinter rhythms. Yet something had shifted for Rebecca. The contact with the outside world had reminded her of responsibilities temporarily set aside, but not forgotten. Her dual identity, teacher of settlement children, student of Lakota ways, had solidified into something new, a potential translator between worlds that desperately needed mutual understanding. As winter's deepest cold gripped the valley, Rebecca found unexpected opportunity to demonstrate her growing competence in Lakota lifeways. A sudden illness swept through the camp, striking particularly hard among the elderly and very young. The symptoms, high fever, painful cough, extreme fatigue, resembled influenza outbreaks she'd witnessed in eastern cities. While tribal healers applied traditional remedies, Rebecca contributed nursing techniques she'd learned during a Philadelphia hospital volunteer position before moving west. The combination of approaches proved effective, particularly her emphasis on isolation protocols to prevent further spread. Your healing knowledge saved lives, Maka acknowledged after the crisis passed, especially little Beaver's family, who might have lost all 3 children without your care. I only applied what I learned from white doctors, combined with Wichapi's herbal knowledge, Rebecca demurred. The children's recovery is credit to both traditions working together. This successful integration of healing approaches created new openness toward Rebecca's other cross-cultural insights. Elders who had previously maintained polite distance now sought her perspectives on various matters. Young warriors asked about settlement life with genuine curiosity rather than hostile skepticism. Women incorporated her organizational suggestions into traditional tasks, finding unexpected efficiencies. Most significantly, her relationship with Maka evolved from respectful cultural guide and protected visitor to something more complex and meaningful. Their conversations deepened, touching on personal histories, philosophical questions, and uncertain futures. They found in each other receptive minds that challenged assumptions without dismissing traditions, rare counterpoints in worlds that typically demanded conformity. Late one evening, they walked together along a sheltered path through the snow-covered forest, checking a hunting blind Maka had constructed. The night was still, stars brilliant in the clear winter sky, their breath forming cloud patterns that danced briefly before dissolving. Your letters, he said, unexpectedly, breaking comfortable silence. "What will happen when they reach your people?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "Best outcome? Military leaders admit the truth about my abandonment. Tensions ease as they realize I've been treated with respect, not harmed or held captive. Perhaps small steps toward understanding between our communities begin. And worst outcome? She sighed, watching her breath dissipate. They dismiss my words as coerced or confused, use my continued absence as further justification for aggression. Nothing changes." Maka was quiet for several steps. "And for you personally? When spring allows travel, what path will Rebecca Collins choose?" The question she'd been avoiding crystallized between them, unavoidable now. Her answer would shape not just her future, but potentially those of both communities she now served. "I must return to my students," she said finally. "They need education that helps them understand this territory's complexity, not simplified lessons that perpetuate misunderstanding and fear." "Yes, children deserve truth, even when difficult." He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "But this is professional duty. What does woman's heart choose, beyond teacher's obligation?" Rebecca felt the weight of his question, its implication and invitation both clear yet delicately presented. The growing connection between them had become impossible to ignore, yet equally impossible to fully acknowledge within the constraints of their respective positions and communities. "My heart is learning new languages," she answered carefully, "discovering that love and belonging aren't confined to familiar territories." Maka's eyes reflected starlight as he studied her face. "Difficult trails often lead to most important destinations. Yes, but not all can follow such trails without losing something essential along the way." He reached for her hand, a gesture both gentle and bold in its transgression of cultural boundaries. Through their gloves, the connection was muted, yet profound. "Some losses make room for greater gains," he said softly. Before Rebecca could respond, distant voices called Maka's name, shattering the private moment. A hunting party had returned, with unexpected success, several elk that would provide crucial meat for the remainder of winter. As chief, his presence was required for the rituals of gratitude and distribution that would follow. "We will speak again," he promised, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Some conversations cannot end with single sunset." In the days that followed, Rebecca's internal landscape shifted as dramatically as the winter one around her. The possibility Maka had outlined of a future that somehow bridged their separate worlds seemed simultaneously impossible and inevitable, terrifying and exhilarating. William's memory remained treasured, but now existed alongside new emotions she could no longer deny. Her cameo brooch with his image continued as her daily companion, yet its significance had transformed, from anchor to a lost past to honor. For a journey completed, the heart expands to hold what it must, Standing Fawn had told her when Rebecca haltingly confided her confused feelings. Like teepee circle grows when new families join band, old lodges don't disappear to make room. For new ones, circle simply widens. This wisdom provided framework for Rebecca's evolving identity. She need not abandon her past to embrace new possibilities. Her love for William, her commitment to settlement education, her cultural heritage, all could remain intact while making space for Lakota connections and transformed understanding. One crisp morning in late winter, a strengthening sun hinted at eventual spring. A scouting party returned to camp with unexpected news. Military movements suggested a significant campaign planned for the thaw, multiple cavalry units converging toward Lakota territories, civilian militia groups arming themselves, supply wagons assembling at frontier outposts. They prepare for war when snow melts, Whitefeather stated grimly as the council gathered to assess this intelligence. Rebecca listened with growing distress as scouts reported specific details, troop numbers, artillery placements, statements from commanding officers about final solutions to the Lakota problem. The narrative being constructed in settlements and military headquarters bore no resemblance to the community that had welcomed her, the sophisticated culture she had experienced firsthand. When invited to contribute her perspective, she spoke with both emotion and strategic clarity. The military leadership seeks justification for territorial control. My continued absence serves their narrative that Lakota warriors are dangerous. Kidnappers of white women, not the protectors and teachers you've been to me. What would you advise? Black Elk asked, the question itself demonstrating how fully she had earned the council's respect. Rebecca looked around the circle of faces, men who had initially regarded her with suspicion but now valued her cross-cultural insights. I must return before the spring campaigns begin, not just for my own sake or my students, but to counter the dangerous story being told about your people. Discussion continued for hours, weighing options against risks, community safety against strategic advantage. Some younger warriors argued that returning Rebecca would appear as weakness or submission. Older council members countered that her truthful testimony might prove more powerful than any military resistance. Maka remained largely silent until the debate had circled repeatedly. When he finally spoke, his words carried the quiet authority that had first impressed Rebecca months earlier. The teacher came to us by Great Spirit's design when others abandoned her to death. Her presence has brought knowledge, healing, and new vision to our band. Now her departure may bring protection if her words are heard. This is not surrender, but wisdom, using truth as shield against lies. His gaze met hers briefly, complex emotions passing between them despite the formal council setting. They had not spoken privately about their interrupted conversation, both seemingly aware that larger responsibilities temporarily outweighed personal considerations. The council eventually reached consensus. When weather permitted safe passage, Maka himself would escort Rebecca to a neutral trading post where military representatives could retrieve her without risking direct confrontation with the Lakota camp. As preparations began for this eventual journey, still weeks away given the deep snow, Rebecca threw herself into documenting everything she had learned. Her journal expanded with detailed observations about Lakota educational methods, governance, structures, sustainable practices, and spiritual traditions. This would become her most important teaching resource when she returned to her classroom. You create new winter counting, Wichapi observed, watching Rebecca's careful illustrations and notes, but on paper instead of hide. Yes, Rebecca agreed, touched by the comparison, so children of many generations can learn what I've been privileged to experience. Good. When we are gone, words remain. The older woman's expression turned reflective. But remember, best teachings travel through hearts, not just eyes. This wisdom crystallized Rebecca's evolving educational philosophy, knowledge gained. Value not through memorization but through integration into lived experience. The Lakota taught children by involving them in meaningful activities where learning served immediate purpose. Her own teaching upon return would need similar transformation, connecting abstract concepts to children's actual lives and communities. As she prepared physically and intellectually for her return journey, Rebecca's emotional preparation proved more challenging. She had arrived in the Lakota camp as desperate survivor and cultural outsider. She would leave as adopted community member, cross-cultural bridge, and woman facing hard decisions that would define her future path. Most complicated was her unresolved relationship with Maka. Their private moments had grown increasingly rare as spring preparations intensified. Yet each brief interaction carried undeniable meaning. A shared glance across council fire, fingers brushing during communal tasks, conversations that continued previous threads without needing explicit references. One evening, helping prepare hides for spring trading, Rebecca found herself working alongside Standing Fawn, whose perceptive nature had provided guidance throughout her time with the band. "Your hands know our ways now," the young mother observed, "but your eyes look toward horizon. Two paths pull you in different directions." Rebecca nodded, grateful for the direct acknowledgement of her internal conflict. "My duty calls me back to my students, but my heart has found unexpected connections here." Standing Fawn continued her methodical scraping. "When buffalo hunters find fork in trail, they must choose, follow food or follow safety. No single path serves all needs." "What would you do if you were me?" Rebecca asked, genuinely seeking this woman's wisdom. "I would remember that circles can expand," Standing Fawn replied, echoing her earlier counsel. "New paths can connect separate camps, but first snow must melt, making way for growth between." This cryptic yet hopeful perspective sustained Rebecca as winter gradually released its grip on the valley. Each day brought subtle changes: stronger sunlight, longer daylight hours, occasional bird songs heralding eventual renewal. Like the land itself, Rebecca stood balanced between seasons, between worlds, between possible futures, awaiting the thaw that would reveal which seeds might grow from all she had experienced among the Lakota. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.